If you're going to create a business, why not think big? But did you know that being a truly big thinker as a leader in business may take some special skills that you haven't thought about? Today, we're going to talk about that. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Welcome, everyone, once again to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I am your host, Doug Thorpe, and today we're going to talk about what it means to be an exponential leader, and that is about thinking big. And my guest today is a gentleman named Aaron Bear. He has written a book. It's in the background in his screenshot there. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
And where are you calling in from? Remind me.
Yeah, I'm in Phoenix, Arizona.
Phoenix. All right. Great part of the country. So good. Well, Aaron, tell us a little bit first about your kind of background, your experiences that led you to where you are and what sort of prompted the development of this book.
Yeah. So, Doug, over the last 15 years, I've been teaching innovation to very big global 100 companies and actually traveling with those, board of directors, with senior leaders, taking them into different startup ecosystems around the world, places like Tel Aviv and Shanghai and Singapore and Shenzhen and London and Copenhagen, and really studying what are the unique things, what are the companies there that are potentially going to disrupt these very large global 100 companies, and also for help them generate ideas. So had this great journey, worked with companies like Daimler and Coca-Cola and Belfius Bank, which is the National Bank of Belgium. Got an opportunity to travel to over 90 countries and all 50 states doing this. So I decided to do a little bit of research, and, what I kept on seeing is that, the people that I met, and I met so many different exponential leaders, and I met a lot of leaders, and I kind of got a sense of the people that were special, that actually thought a little bit bigger about their ideas and a little bit bigger about the world. And I started just identifying, what are their traits, and, I identified something called the 7 universal truths I cover in the book. And I've also just covered a lot of, in the book, I cover a lot of the research of the different companies that I really focused in on that told such great stories about, what it is to be an exponential leader, but what it also is to be an exponential company. And that ultimately led to me writing this book. I think the pandemic was, a blessing for me. I mean, I'll take the most positive out of every situation, but it allowed me to get off the road. And while I was cooped up, I said, this is the time I finally get to write my book. And that's where I was actually able to finish it for the, 15 years of struggling to kind of write it and pull it together. It was able to come to fruition. And as I wasn't traveling anymore, I was actually able to kind of focus on it and take this research and really come up with this thesis that we call exponential theory, which really is that people, as they think bigger, they become more conscious about the world. And so the reality is I launched a company called 1-Million Exponential Leaders. And now my exponential goal is really to help, as many people as possible think bigger about their future. And candidly, hopefully that helps create a rise of consciousness and a rise of people, basically disrupting every category there is on the planet. So we actually, start solving some of these big problems. Because right now, the present, it seems like we have a lot of problems, but we actually have all the technologies and people to solve those problems. And that's what I hope to do with creating 1-Million Exponential Leaders.
Very noble goal. And I'm sure that when you maybe first came up with that idea, that maybe you're in your close circle of friends, what was the reaction when you announced to everybody what you were thinking about?
Well, it's as I said it, and I think it's one of those things when you're uncomfortable with it. I knew it was the right goal, but I would get on, I was on a podcast a few months ago, and I said, and we're going to create 1,000 exponential leaders, so I wasn't comfortable with the idea that it was a million, knowing that 1 million exponential leaders really does change the world. It may be a goal in my own mind that's bigger than Google's goal was when they started to say organize the world's information. Is 1 million exponential leaders solves a lot of very big problems. And that's, the beauty of that is, and it's part of one of the principles I have in the book, is thinking about the long game. Is I could work on that the rest of my life, and I don't achieve that goal, that's fine, but it has me a true north that, right now, as I get on and I talk to you about exponential leaders, that is my goal. So if we're able, to one of your listeners out there becomes an exponential leader, then I'm one closer to that million. And, whether they come through any of my training or read my book doesn't really matter. It's the fact that I'm spreading this message, and I have recognized that I have a unique understanding of it because I spent so much time with exponential leaders, and I got to meet some of these people that are changing the world. And some of these companies like Tesla and Uber and Airbnb and Netflix that literally, everything they do is exponential, and it's really just about thinking bigger. So I said, I need to capture this so people on the outside can obviously experience that and take that to the world. But I also saw it as there's a democratization of technology and just process where all this used to happen pretty much in Silicon Valley or in New York or in a few different places. But now it's happening in every neighborhood. And that's the true is we need to create more exponential leaders, because the bigger people think about it, the bigger, their own community is going to benefit from that. And that's really the goal, is to touch all these different places I've been by helping share this message through exponential theory and through a course I have called Thinking Bigger. All that is kind of part of me creating 1 million exponential leaders, and helps me just continue to talk about that message. That is my purpose. When I wake up every morning, I think about it, and I was like, what can I create today? As like a little kid, getting to go to kind of create their day, and today I woke up excited to be on your podcast. So glad to be here.
Well, thank you. I hope we can. And it's interesting. I'm thinking about my vision for this year that it now seems dwarfed by your million exponential leaders. I said that I want to help 10,000 people be better bosses, just simply, improve the workplace by showing up as a better boss. The Great Resignation is telling us people are leaving bad cultures and bad bosses. So I'm going to stick with mine because it's a 1-year goal. And I hope, talking to 10,000 business owners or leaders can make them at least seriously ask the question, can I do something differently to be a better boss? I think that'll be a win. And
I think it's a worthy goal. And I think, Bill Gates, I have this quote in my book that a lot of people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, but underestimate what they can do in 10 years. So, maybe it's as you wrap your head around a longer 10-year goal that you can, think about a bigger number. But it's not about the number. It's just the fact that you're doing what you love to do. I mean, at the end of the day, I had to get something that I was uncomfortable with, because I knew that would every day push me out there when I said it to really work that much harder to get it. And as you understand, exponential curves, they're very flat and very deceptive at the beginning, and then they curve up and really grow exponentially. And I think the biggest thing about being exponential is having the patience to be able to go through that flat curve, as Amazon did, as Tesla did, as, so many of these companies that potentially could have faltered or failed only a few years ago to now be, the largest companies in the world, because they've reached that exponential curve. So it is a matter about having a longer term vision than just a year. So
let's
your goal is very worthy.
So let's talk about the basic definition. What does it take to be considered an exponential leader?
Yeah, I think the number one, Salim Ismail wrote a book called Exponential Organizations. I've actually helped work on the version 2 of that. In that book, there's one core principle that's in every exponential organization, and that's and what he did is he looked at basically all the unicorns, all these startups that are worth over $1 billion, and he looked at all the ones that have really grown exponentially, as including the companies like Google and Tesla now and Uber, Airbnb, and even WeWork. These companies that have found a way to exponentially speed up their growth, and it's having a massive transformative purpose, and really a purpose-driven work culture. I'll take Elon Musk. All of his different companies have massive transformative purposes. And what he's done well, what that does, for a couple of things about making people good bosses is he has such a big goal, it starts to attract big thinkers. At the end of the day, NASA has always been one of the best places to work for really smart, if we talk about aeronautical engineers or anything, it's like, I want to work at NASA. For the first time, SpaceX kind of competes with that because he's actually doing the things that NASA want to do. He's now actually, getting missions to shuttle people back and forth from the International Space Station and doing things that are unheard of for a privatized space company. But he actually set his goal is that by 2040, he's going to colonize Mars. So I always say Google created moonshots and Elon Musk created Mars shots. So he actually said, how can I think bigger than moonshots? Well, I'll just say I'm going to colonize Mars by 2040. And that's such a big goal that whether he gets there or not, just look what he's achieved by setting the goal and the bar so high. And that's what you see in every one of his companies, which, I consider probably Elon Musk the mascot of my book, where he really, as an exponential thinker, takes these exponential technologies and he understands how to put a big goal, understands that it's going to take time. And he's obviously had the intuition and persistence and determination to keep Tesla going, even in times. Just back in 2018, there was questions of whether Tesla would make it. And now it has the largest market capitalization of any automobile company. So it's an interesting paradigm on exponential companies, because for the longest time, people are very critical of exponential leaders because they say very big numbers and big things, where we don't feel like they're going to actually reach it. And probably not all of them do, but it's that persistence and the longer term vision that people have that get it there. Jeff Bezos and Amazon's another one. He had to retrain analysts that he had negative quarters for like 19 years in a row. But he had to say, we're building something for the future. And then obviously, as the COVID crisis hit, Amazon exponentially just, grew even faster than it was, because they were set up for success and a longer term vision that people needed the services that he provided. So it's just that long term viewpoint, and it's galvanizing people to get behind that, which is I think a very important part to today's workforce. Is we're no longer the incentives of money and ping pong tables and all these little, amenities aren't as important as, give me something big to think about and let me be part of something really big, and let my opinion matter and let my voice be heard. And we're seeing that with millennials and Gen Y, Gen X, Gen Z. We're seeing that they're choosing, purpose over profit. And that's literally changing the whole world to be a little bit more conscious. And I think that's kind of part of this movement that we have, that exponential companies are leading the way doing.
So, in my work with executive coaching, there's some fundamental questions that always come up. One of which is, are leaders born or bred? Can you do either one of those? In terms of someone that proves to become or demonstrate this exponential thinking, are they born or are they bred?
Well, I think you can be born into a family that maybe thinks bigger. And I think we actually, in some of the coaching I do, I really talk about the past and the limitations, regrets, maybe your self-talk that was created in the past. That's stuff that we have to strip away to really get to a mindset to be in the moment, to actually start thinking bigger. A lot of people are caught up on whatever limitations people put in the back. And I talk about this a little bit in the book, but more in my course, that really helps people to look at the past and understand what are the traumas and can we make meaning of these obstacles that actually accelerate our growth into the future. And then as we look at the future, we make up these things on anxiety, worries, stress, doubts, and fears. And the acronym for fear that I always use is false evidence appearing real. We often make up a lot of stuff about our lives that really create us. And what I've learned about being around exponential leaders is, they know that every thought of theirs actually creates the future that they go into. So they're very careful with their thoughts. They're also, careful with their habits because they're spending the times on the right things. And that's when I often meet with leaders. We strip it down to like, how are you mindful, or what programs that we need to reprogram from the past? And then what do we need to unlearn? Because I also think the whole self-help industry is, it makes you feel inadequate or that you need help, when the reality is you're exactly where you need to be because every decision you've made has brought you here. It's just that maybe you need to learn something. And then I also really emphasize is maybe you need to unlearn a lot of things about what other people told you who you are, because those are the ones holding you back from being exponential. So to answer your question directly is leaders learn to be exponential. And I think right now, even some of the greatest leaders of the big companies who think linearly, and some of my clients that I've worked with in the boardroom at companies that are, literally $50 billion companies, if they're still wanting to grow at 5 to 7%, there are dozens of companies that are growing at 10x, that are thinking at 10x, that it doesn't take long. There's a deceptive period, but then there becomes a period that they actually overtake those big companies. That jumping from the linear, equation to an exponential is a learned behavior, because you have to think differently. And candidly, it's kind of this idea of risk is something we mitigate in big companies, but the reality is it's more risky to not take risk today in today's world with the changes that are happening because of the accelerated pace of change and technology. If we don't take the risk to actually put our company that will disrupt ourselves, we will be disrupted by someone else. And so many of the companies that I've worked with, an example is Mercedes-Benz. They may look at BMW and for the longest time just be competing with BMW to say this is really the people that buy our cars or their cars, and maybe it's Audi and maybe some of the others. But the reality of, in the end, is what's really disrupting them and what we've learned over the last 5 to 7 years are not. And that's where you see BMW and Mercedes now teaming up to create products, because outside of their industry is actually going to disrupt them faster than their industry themselves. So we're seeing, I use VUCA in the book, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I have this VUCA mental model where companies need to establish a vision for where they want to be. They got to create absolute understanding and clarity, and then be agile to obviously kind of work towards their vision of who they want to be in the future. And that's really getting everybody in the company to have that massive transformative purpose and think about that vision to get there. And that's the pieces that I help people, really think through, whether it's at a board level of a global company or it's a small business, a startup that may be venture backed, or even a startup business that I was just working with at lunch that, literally has invested a couple $1 million in a product and has zero sales, but they're on the cusp of actually breaking through in an industry. And they're just in that deceptive phase where, if they keep having a longer term vision of what it is, they have an opportunity to obviously change that industry. Right now, though, the confidence of those founders may not be there. And that's really was my goal, is to go be their cheerleader, to give them the confidence to understand is you're not wrong in what you've done. You've just got to have the persistence and patience and determination to obviously see it through. And that's where understanding where the market is, they have a lot of purchase orders and things that people want to buy. And it's like getting across the chasm. If I can use that epiphany where, innovation and seeing the future, there's a lot of losers and there's a few winners, and generally the winners are the ones that are still standing that can, pay the monthly bills to get there. So it's either raising the massive amounts of money, or it's actually creating a business model that's repeatable, predictable, scalable, and sustainable, which is what I coach to, is really helping people think through how do they make it repeatable? How do they make it more predictable? How are they going to scale their business to create a better business model? Because the reality is, even the top 5 companies in the world, none of them are in the same business that they were 10 years ago, and that could be Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Apple, and Facebook, as far as brand names. None of those companies were in the top 5 10 years ago, and none of them are in the same business. And you even hear Apple saying, like, maybe they're going to stop selling iPhones. It just becomes a subscription service. You're seeing Tesla could do that with their cars, because it's a better business model than selling products. If you can, obviously own the product and have it shared, it actually scales quite a bit more, and you can generate more revenue out of each product. So those are conversations I'm having on a daily basis to help people think more exponentially.
Well, back to the core statement there, thinking about the leaders that have that exponential mindset. I often, in my own coaching, I talk to executives and business owners about the idea that we all share one common denominator, everybody that walks the face of the earth wakes up in the morning with the same amount of time in the day. And the 24 hours, the 8,600 seconds, whatever the math is on that. And you ask the question, why does an Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos do what they do with their time in the day versus what you and I might do or anybody else? And the answer is they are very intentional. They're very purposeful. They're very focused on whatever vision they've laid out, and they are able to articulate that vision. And they're ultimately very disciplined about how they spend that time in the day making those things happen.
Yeah.
And in my mind, that's the one big differentiator on why you can name an individual that seems to have achieved so much greater success in whatever their business is. It's about that, finding that clarity, that vision, that sense of direction that you want to go. And in your case, specifically, having this exponential element of them in the mindset.
Yeah.
As opposed to simply that 2X or 3X kind of growth mind.
Yeah. And I think once you have that, once people have clarity of what you do and where you want to go, that changes, your leadership. Leaders, I think, part of their goal is, I always say manage projects, not people. And I think leaders, ultimately need to find like this universal belonging for people, obviously talk to each individual as if they're unique and create this ultimate goal, for people to really wrap their head around so that they, every day when they go to work, they know how to why they're making a decision, and that's the Simon Sinek's why, is really creating that purpose so that it makes it easy to make decisions. And your leadership team will take more risk, in growing in the areas that you want to grow in versus other companies. I think it goes to, what you said about habits. I literally have this in the book, and I talk about, we are our habits. How we spend our days is how we spend our lives. It's also about what we think about, because a lot of people are really caught up, and it goes to, I'll use social medias. There's doom scrolling, and people are always worried about what other people think of them. And there's compare culture and cancel culture and polarized views in social media that are causing us all these disruption to us not getting to our potential or not finding like our purpose or a massive transformative purpose. The leaders that you just mentioned, just like you said, I'm in 100% agreement. It's their habits of how they spend their days. And then inside of that time that they're spending, they have the same 80,400 seconds, as you said. They're not getting distracted by these little things. What they're really is doing is a call to action to these bigger things. And they continue to attract the right people, the right partners. They're spending their time like literally growing themselves where, I'll use like the law of attraction lightly here, but it's this idea that if you're always thinking about how to be bigger, then things will come into your world that obviously help you create a path to bigger. And that's because you're making the phone calls, and that's because you're putting the energy instead of people that say, I don't want this to happen, or I don't want that. If they're focused on all the things they don't want, what you resist persists usually happens. And, we see that with leaders. These are part of my, unlearning and reprogramming is the self-talk really matters. And when I spent time with some of these exponential leaders, a lot of times we think of them as their ego is just because they're so confident in their vision and what they want to do. And it has to do with some ego, but the reality is they don't care about the people, and there's critics for everything. And all these people may have had the most critics ever. Bill Gates, who is, literally put all of his money, into philanthropy, is often criticized by, conspiracy theories and all kinds of things because he was so successful, just like Microsoft was criticized for a long time, or Elon Musk. But these exponential thinkers, kept to their mission, their purpose. And they obviously saw that through. And that's why you're looking at some of the richest people in the world, which Elon Musk candidly will likely be our first trillionaire, which sounds crazy, but we see it just because, he's in 6 or 7 different industries where he has massive transformative purposes. He understands technology. He obviously, much like I think I heard this the other day, in a way has some habits that even Donald Trump had, is like, I need to be in the news cycle every 48 hours. But as far as his own companies, he's probably created more shareholder value than any other CEO ever. has he meddled in different areas that may be him just having fun because he can? Maybe that's ego or whatever when he's, talking about Dogecoin or Bitcoin and all these
Twitter.
different topics or Twitter, all these things that are going on, are honestly distractions for him. But it's also the fact that he's lived out his dreams and now he's finding like, what can I create as a bigger dream? And I think that's part of what drives these exponential leaders, where he doesn't, I saw the other day that he literally sold all of his homes and he lives in a spare bedroom of a friend's house, so here you got the richest man in the world understanding that the assets that he's not focused on his purpose, then he's just going to keep driving at his purpose. It's fascinating to, look at the mindset of that, because of our time, we've never seen anyone create so much change. I'm obviously, very much, I studied Elon Musk quite a bit, I visited Tesla, done a lot of different things to learn about that. And that's a big a chapter in my book, because, he really reinvented the automobile industry by not focusing on creating an automobile, but creating the best battery. And at the time it sounded absurd, but here 15 years later, he laid out that vision and it's coming true exactly as he laid it out. And that just shows you his long-term determination and persistence, that he knew it was going to take a long term to be there. And he had doubts along the way. And I think that's what we have to realize, is that we're all human. In 2018, he literally reached out to Tim Cook to say, how can Apple buy Tesla? Because I don't know that we're going to be able to make payroll and make this all work. And here we are 4 years later, and it's literally the richest company in the world. So richest automobile company in the world.
Yeah. Well, Aaron, we're kind of up on time here to need to take a break real fast. This has been fascinating. And when we come back, we'll dive further into this idea of what it takes to be an exponential leader. We'll be right back.
Business is all about solving complex problems as fast as you can create them. Become the best problem solver by leading others to greatness too. And the first step is going to DougThorpe.com. Doug Thorpe is known globally for coaching entrepreneurs and business leaders, improving their performance and the work output of everyone surrounding them. You can find health, wealth, and happiness by learning to lead others to health, wealth, and happiness. Go to DougThorpe.com now and order Doug's books or hire him to coach your managers. That's DougThorpe.com.
Well, hello again, everyone. We're back, and today I'm visiting with Aaron Bear. He is the author of Exponential Theory, and that's we've been talking about how leaders can become exponential leaders, taking really big ideas and making them happen. Aaron, one of the things I think that does come to mind, we can talk about the individual that had the vision and is the driving force, like an Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos. But there's a big dynamic that is required that I guess I would call the next step. How do those leaders build culture in a company to make those things happen? What has your experience and research said about the cultures that these guys help nurture?
Yeah, I mean, I think, an interesting part, if I were to take Google as an example, we kind of dive into culture, a lot of these different companies, because it is an important ingredient to the overall success of their businesses, is figuring out, exactly how, teams work, how leaders work. And Google had an interesting project called Project Aristotle. And Google is a very data-driven business, which I think all of these exponential companies, really back up their decisions with data. So what Google did is they interviewed 180 plus teams to find out, what makes them work. And in this project, their goal was, and just to give you an example, for those that maybe, a lot of your listeners probably haven't visited the Google campus. I've been there a dozen times, but Google does use this data so much and so well that within about 150 foot of every person's desk is a snack station. So they can get there and get back and not have too many interruptions. And they've figured all this out with science and math. And it even goes to how they have lunch and how they triangulate their walks and how they even put their conference rooms and all these different things. So they've really used science. But to give you an example of this is their snack stations. What they did to actually improve productivity for their team is some of the heavy sugary soda beverages they put on the very bottom shelf. And they started putting the more healthy things in the middle. Same with the snacks. They would put the chocolates and the, M&Ms and things at they didn't take them away, but they made them harder to reach for, and they put healthier options out front. What they figured out is they had less spikes of energy because they were avoiding this, and they were actually getting more productivity from their teams in the afternoon by doing this. This is the data-driven approach of Google. So their workplace people were using data to kind of triangulate that. So what Google did is they created Project Aristotle, that they interviewed people on 250 attributes. And what they learned is there's really 5 key dynamics that set teams apart. Psychological safety was one. Can we take risk on this team without feeling insecure or embarrassed? And I think that's a big part of people just being part of a team and feeling comfortable. And what they found in this, and I'll give you these other 4 variables first, but dependability, can we count on each other to do high quality work and on time? Structure and clarity. This goes back to my whole vision, understanding, clarity. Are goals, roles, and execution plans on a team clear? Meaning of work. Are we working on something that's personally important to us? An impact of work. Do we fundamentally believe the work we're doing matters? So what they found is these 5 elements kind of drove everything. And what they started to look at in these teams is, even though you could put the highest performer on a team, the team that did these 5 best questions actually outperformed the other teams at Google. And we're talking about elite level. These are people, and we're generally talking about engineers like that are producing kind of outputs, because that's what Google is, really an engineer focused company where, it leads to their culture. Their culture was to organize the world's information, yet they had engineers, and they said, you can spend 20% of your time working on anything you want to work on. So what happened over time is Google started solving some of the world's problems outside of organizing the world's information. And that ultimately led them to actually leading to changing their name to Alphabet, where Alphabet now has a robotics division. It has, all these different divisions. That is where they've invested time. Home automation, where they bought Nest and some of these other things. So Google's whole purpose of organizing information was used to where snacks are placed, to how teams perform, to how they, literally, organize their whole office and how people are situated, what teams people are on. All those dynamics are played, much like a sports team would use analytics to improve their overall process. Google has done that and done it well. And they also have the most senior in Silicon Valley. They probably put more change. Google's kind of leading the way of people that have left Google and started all these other exponential startups. It's because of that culture that they created, then permeates throughout it all. The other important kind of culture that I think is Sheryl Sandberg, who's the COO of Facebook, said the most important document in Silicon Valley is a PowerPoint deck that was created by Netflix. And this deck really kind of shows how Netflix really changed the game from, where they were as a company. Is they really defined a culture that led everything to an abundance of content, which was their outcome. But this document talked about creativity is the most important in procedural work. The best is 2x better than average. In creative and inventive work, they said the best is 10x better. So what they really realized is, how do we actually create that? And they prioritized, prioritize discovery over job security. So many people love the culture and stay a long time. They thrive on the excellence of candor and change. But some, security over, is value job security over performance and don't like our culture. The people that do like job security over performance, it is about performing. And Netflix is very clear for that. But poor employee behavior is caused by misunderstanding. They also have this cultural belief that poor employee behavior is caused by acting stupid, is caused by a failure of communication. So they actually take that as human nature does that. So they really create a safe place to say, okay, you might have made a mistake here, but what could you have learned from that? And, even part of that abundance is they have unlimited vacation at Netflix and no tracking, really no policy and no tracking. All that led to this unique culture that took abundance to the next level. It literally permeated the culture of how do we create abundance. And now Netflix has an abundance of content. They're growing exponentially still, around the world. They passed 200-300 million users or whatever it is, in complete control of their future. They're creating content, that creative level that they talked about. Between them and Apple, they really lead the way in the Oscars. It's no longer the movie houses, it's these organizations that are putting out the, quality content. So you see this kind of new culture, like what we can learn from these companies. All this can be implemented at any company in the world, just as long as you can start to create a bigger, if you can think bigger, you're going to attract those bigger thinkers, and that's going to help. So that's largely what I spend my time doing, is helping, smaller companies think bigger about what they're doing, really help them gain traction, develop the culture that'll be one to create a safer place, because the culture is, leaders create leaders, and, it really matters if someone thinks big or not. And there are leaders that are leading really large organizations, believe it or not, that don't think big. That actually hurts the whole culture, because the rest of the culture then isn't required to have any creativity or innovation or really thinking outside the box. And what we see is those companies are stagnant. And that's why the S&P 500 50 years ago had an average lifespan of 67 years. And the day it's like down to like 12 years, which that just shows you how fast S&P 500 companies, one, they're merging and getting taken over, or, they're not being innovative enough to stay on that list. And that truly is a changing dynamic that, we're not to like pop-up companies yet, but technology really is increasing the speed for all companies.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you on the culture issue, that it is leaders create leaders. And I was in a meeting earlier today with a client, and we were talking about the idea that their particular company is about I think he told me $50 million valuation right now. So they're doing some great things and on a good growth path, but they've begun to ask themselves the question, do we have the right culture to take us to the next level? And it wasn't quite exponential thinking, but I think it was a profound question given what I've learned about the company. And he said, do you think we're going to do okay just defining the culture? And I said, well, that's the first step. It's one thing to have the C-suite or the board or whoever you want to put around the table define a target culture that you want to go after. But once you do that, the very next and vital step is getting the entire leadership team on board with it. Because you can put words on a page or in a nice, beautiful slide deck, but until you assimilate and test that all your leadership chain has the same fundamental understanding and clarity on what those values and visions and ideas are about, you're not going to have a culture change. You're going to have chaos.
Well, and I think that's part of, in my own, is thinking bigger, is if everyone thinks bigger, you start to understand that the small stuff doesn't matter as much, and you have bigger conversations. But, part of that is being very clear. And I think that's around the clarity and the VUCA model that I shared about vision, understanding, clarity, and having agility. Is having that clarity that everybody understands the vision, and that's reverse engineering that VUCA, where, it comes down as this is all of our decisions are made because we're going here. We're going to do this, whatever that is. And the reality is, a lot of times when I walk into a boardroom, my first question is, I'd love to ask each of you what the vision of this company is. And then within a minute or two, you see people disagreeing. And I said, okay, this is something we have to start working on now, because if you can't agree here in the boardroom, how is every employee, how is every person that is meant to buy into this system? I look at them as systems, because I don't think you manage, and I said this earlier briefly, but I want to provide clarity. This is, I don't think you manage people, you really manage outcomes, because for so much is what we want creativity and innovation out. Telling people exactly what to do will not get us to think bigger. So it's a matter of, if we have these bigger outcomes, is people surprise you when they step into wanting to have a bigger role, and a bigger responsibility. And those companies are really growing, attract those people. And then, you have to put the time and energy into your leadership development, because generally there's a gap between the senior leadership. And then as you go down in a smaller, like a $50 million organization, what happens when there's a change of guard? And right now we're going through one of the biggest transformations in history, where baby boomers are retiring or, leaving leaving the corporate structure, and you have all these companies that are in that size that either need to merge with someone to survive, but they really need leadership to kind of be built into that. And that's a big gap right now, that I don't think there's a lot of family businesses that are prepared for that. And I think it's a space that if we help them think more exponentially, some of them actually can get a second life and grow just about their own, what they're doing. But part of that is getting people into the right places in the company so that they can, one, create a vision that everyone can agree in and buy into. And then, part of, pivoting and change is that you need to lose some of your leadership every once in a while and continue to shed that. And I think that, is unfortunately a part of being part of the corporate world, is there are times that you need to depart from people. And, that can be a good thing to bring new people in as well, which candidly in some of these global companies that I've worked with, they're very much from a promote from within. And now all of a sudden you have everybody, with one ideology. They all think alike. Well, then they all are literally driving the car off the cliff, if, no pun intended. But we see that with some of the global organizations I've worked with.
Yeah, I was in that meeting I was referring to today earlier. I was reminded of a situation. I was helping a Fortune 50 company with culture change they wanted to embark on. And there was a situation, there was a senior executive that happened to be female, and they were very sensitive to having females in their, senior leadership circle. But as they locked in on this culture direction they wanted to go, she proved to be a hindrance. She just wasn't embracing it, wasn't accepting it, and in fact was performing contrary to the new values they wanted to embrace, in terms of like calling people out in public meetings and, things that weren't consistent with the new culture. And they finally made the tough call to ask her to expedite her retirement because she wasn't going to help them make this change they were looking for. And to your point, sometimes you have to jettison people that aren't going to get on the bus and follow the direction.
Yeah, and I think that's a point as far as, looking at the diversity, talking a little bit about diversity and such, is companies need to really look at their senior leadership to say, is this a reflection of the customers that we serve? And if not, that's part of that restructuring, is kind of to figure out, do we look like the customers we serve? Otherwise, it is an injustice. And I think that's part of, even in my book towards the end, I talk about Larry Fink, that from BlackRock, which is one of the largest asset managers in the world, and his really call to action to diversify boards, to have companies think a little bit more about the environment, where they're going to make more conscious decisions, just because it's a better investment. And that's what we're seeing, is these companies that think more exponentially, have bigger, actually think about the different stakeholders, just not the shareholders. Because at the end of the day, what it's proved out is you are going to be persecuted if there's something you're hiding or whatever. It is going to come out, with the transparency of social media and cameras and phones and recording devices and everything. Is, it's better to do the right thing than not. And that's, always my advice to boards, is to start to move in a direction that supports, the growth of the company. And that's representing, the clients, that you serve, or the customers that you serve, is making sure that, you look like them, you have a voice in the room, that you have inclusion and diversity and equity, because, that is going to actually drive companies. And we're seeing all these exponential companies are really embracing that. And we're actually putting a lot of money into it and really working towards it. And it's not the easiest thing, is that talent has not been developed at the pace that others have been developed in the past. And that's where we've got to play catch up. But we've seen that companies that really embrace that they've actually done much better in their returns. And that's where, it's not my word, it's Larry Fink, who's at BlackRock, managing close to $10 trillion, saying this is what we're going to invest in because it just makes better business sense. And, I think people are starting to listen to that. And it's part of the world thinking bigger, is, an exponential theory in the end is we become more conscious and we understand, what needs to be done, and we will make, better choices. And I think it's all about, are we ignorant or are we informed? And, so much of leaders have been ignorant to what's really happening, with data and information. We need to bring that information so that they can make decisions for the greater good of the company. And sometimes it's often the harder decision to make, but we have to start making those decisions to make the changes to be relevant in the future, because we will have many companies that are name brands will be irrelevant and obviously be part of this big graveyard of, Kodaks and Blockbusters and all these companies that have gone by the wayside because they weren't willing to change.
Right. Well, I want to bring up one last topic, because this notion of beginning to think like an exponential leader and being that real driving force. I'm going to foreshadow an episode I've got coming up. I've got a guest in the queue here that wrote a book about the tall poppy syndrome. Are you familiar with it?
I'm not.
It's a phenomenon that actually goes back in the history of mankind. You can actually find references to this, and he has done some research. He was introduced to it in Australia. It's a very prevalent mindset. What it says is, when you think of a field of poppies, there's always going to be one or two that are, inches, if not feet, taller than the others around them. And same is true in mankind. People rise up among the masses and become head and shoulder taller, not literally taller, but because of accomplishment and achievement, they rise up from the masses. But there's a dynamic where the syndrome part kicks in. There's a dynamic. There's always a force of cutters around you that want to lop you off and bring you back down to the size of the mass that you come from. And apparently in Australia, it's actually a cultural thing. They cheer for their teams and they're excited about group process, but there's a cultural bias against doing anything that's going to project you up ahead of your peers. And they actually name it when it comes up, and it's short as TPS, and it means tall poppy syndrome. So I'm thinking, and like I said, I've got an episode coming up with this gentleman. His name is Dr. Doug Garland. We're going to talk about that then, but it strikes me that all of these guys we've been talking about, all your examples that you've brought forward, undeniably tall poppies in the field, wherever they are. And you did allude to it, some of the naysayers that were swirling around, some of the energy, but you, as I recall, what you alluded to is that these guys that are true exponential leaders have a way of sloughing that off. When the cutters show up to kind of take them down a notch, they have a resilience that, it just doesn't allow them to be worried with that. They keep moving forward.
Yeah. And I think, many of them have surrounded themselves with people that kind of insulate them from that. If you look, Bill Gates getting Steve Ballmer and different people involved early on. Elon Musk has literally management teams at every one of his companies that help him stay focused. And, I think, but you look, even Elon Musk's relationship with social media, he likes to fight back. And I think that's, part of his interest of being in media and keeping his name and his companies moving, because that's part of what has survived is his ability to, keep, Tesla and some of these, wild ideas at one time that are now just real companies,
just really control the narrative.
Yeah, you can, and part of that, and, even got in trouble, I think, when he got in his most trouble with Twitter and the SEC is, he literally was fighting back and forth with the SEC and had to pay a fine or whatever, but bought himself enough time, to create this distraction in the news that he was able to kind of get past those moments. And he had to pay for him a $20 million fine or whatever it was. For any one of us, that'd probably been, the end of the day. But for, an exponential thinker, that literally created more publicity. And you see this in people like Mark Cuban and, different people that don't mind getting fines, because that publicity obviously leads to more opportunities for
Any
them.
news is good news.
Yeah. And that's a short way of thinking it, but I think the tall poppy syndrome, I mean, it is a true thing. I mean, I use crabs in the bucket where, if one crab's, working to get out, is that all the other, crabs are pulling that back. So it is a process that, we're, very much when you go into situations, and even when you're looking at diversity and inclusion and different things like that within a company, you see, certain groups of people holding each other back, which, is why we're not getting the leadership or the diversity that we have. So there's a long way to go to really create this abundance mindset. But I think the key to exponential leaders is that there is no scarcity. I mean, we live in a world of true abundance, meaning we're heading, to where potentially everyone has, right now I write in the book and I say there's a widening gap between rich and poor, as far as the money in their bank accounts, but they're still searching for the same electricity and the same Wi-Fi, and they're still doing using the same applications as each other. So at the end of the day, Wi-Fi and electricity is free at Starbucks and McDonald's. So you can be a homeless person and have access to that, which doesn't say that's any equalizer. But what it says is when you're an exponential thinker and people are cutting you down, it's because you're working for your purpose. And many of these leaders, what's interesting about them when you really get down, they weren't ever driven by the money. They were really driven by the purpose. And I think that's the most thing I'd like to instill with any listener is just find something you love to do. And it doesn't matter what it is, just be the best at it. And then slowly think bigger and bigger at it. And I've often got on these podcasts and riffed with people in different industries, from coin operating, laundry, to you name it, about how I can help, expand an industry. And there's infinite ways, if you apply new technologies to an industry, that you can actually make every industry merge with others or grow. And I think it's going to take these exponential leaders to be able to do that. And that's part of being willing to be the tall poppy, because at the end of the day, people are always, even me saying 1 million exponential leaders, people are, going to be skeptical of that. I'm probably at number 10,000 now. So hopefully we get a couple more from being on this podcast that join the ranks. But it's also just even yourself, Doug, thinking about your own, helping 10,000 people. Now, if you come up with a 10-year goal, and I'll listen to your tall poppy conversation since we foreshadowed that, is maybe share an exponential goal that what's your 10-year goal? Because once you start thinking, people underestimate what they can achieve in 10 years. And there are very few people, and that's where exponential thinkers, one of the key differences is people having longer term goals. We're often, candidly in sales positions that are looking at the, this week, this month, or this quarter. The reality is if we start creating bigger goals, we can accomplish so much more. Yeah. And it's about that persistence and determination to get there.
I agree totally. And Aaron, I think we're just about up on our time here. This has been fascinating and wonderful. Real quick, tell everybody the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in connecting.
Yeah, you can go to aaronbear.com, AARONBARE. You can find me on Instagram, Aaron Bear, Twitter, Aaron Bear, LinkedIn, Aaron Bear. I think you get the point. Yeah. I was early squatter with all these, so I got my name everywhere that you look. So I probably find me first.
I know that.
Too many other Aaron Bears out there.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, and as always, we'll have those links specifically in the show notes for all the listeners out there. So, Aaron, again, thank you for sitting in. This is fascinating. And I think the bottom line is everybody can afford to think a little bit bigger.
That's it, Doug. And that's hopefully what we gave them a little opportunity to do that, and just maybe rethink about their own visions, because if we help expand those, we can solve bigger problems. All of us are part of solving all the problems in the future. So the more we think bigger, the better chance we got.
I like it. Well, everyone, this has been another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. We appreciate you listening in and hope to see you again real soon. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.